Good afternoon, everyone. If you can see us and hear us, we are going to give it a couple minutes to make sure that we are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and then we'll dive into today's webinar. But for now, you can just listen to us chit-chat for a little bit while we make sure we're good to go. Hey, Cynthia. Hey, Leah.
Hello, ladies.
How are you?
Chit-chatting is good.
Chit-chatting is the best. I love these segments where we're waiting for things to go live and for our audience to join us. And it's just this awkward kind of few 30 seconds of people trying to figure out what to say.
Yes. So I don't know. I should have had some jokes prepared or something, but I don't know. Jokes.
Cynthia, next time we'll expect you to come prepared with a stand-up routine. You can just go with that and it'll be great.
Yeah.
It may not be great, but I can do that.
We'll give you the laughs anyway. Well, I just heard from Nia, and she has given us the good to go. So we have video and we have sound as well. So I'm going to go through a little bit of an intro here, give folks a few more minutes to join us before we really dive into the meat of everything. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for tuning into today's webinar, DEI and Change Management, Navigating Challenges and Celebrating Triumphs of Your New Diversity Initiatives. I'm honored today to be joined by two of my favorite people, my colleague Leah and our guest of the hour, Cynthia Rodriguez. Thank you both for being here.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be with both of you.
Yes, and thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Great. So before we dive into today's topic, I just want to take a really quick minute to introduce today's cast. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ryan Brown, a lead recruiter here at HireWall, an advisor and content creator at CareerWall, joined by my colleague Leah, who is a recruiter at HireWall and content creator at CareerWall, and now, of course, our guest of the hour, Cynthia. Cynthia has worked in a number of industries, including healthcare and tech, and is really passionate about helping people to understand themselves more fully so that they're able to access their greatness, communicate effectively, and be the best versions of themselves possible. She's currently a consultant for Holistic, a technology firm devoted to improving the employee experience and using proprietary tools and a targeted data-driven approach, focusing on equity, inclusion, diversity, fairness, advancement, opportunity, and consistency of treatment. So Cynthia has a bachelor's in organizational management from Eastern University and her master's in human resources leadership from North Park University as well. She's a certified human resources professional and proficient in a number of assessment tools. Cynthia and her husband, Michael, a DJ, spend their time between Chicago and San Diego, both of which Cynthia has deemed the two best cities in the States. Awesome.
True story.
Love it. Love it. Well, as everyone can tell, Cynthia is obviously an expert in the DEI space. So I think with that, we should be ready to dive in with today's webinar and questions. So Leah, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think we should probably start with some basics. So Cynthia, how is DEI defined?
So DEI is simply diversity, equity, and inclusion. And DEI itself is really one of the main pillars of the overall employee experience. The others, in my opinion, are leadership development and employee engagement and all those things that drive it. So there's also a newer term that's associated with that, DEIB, DBIE, DEIB, however you want to say it. And the B is for belonging. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But, it's really up to the organization to determine what order they would like to use the letters and why it's important, how these things sort of align with the values of their organization and whatever fits for them.
So Cynthia, you mentioned this new term that's coming into the diversity, inclusion, and equity space being belonging. What does that mean?
So when I hear people describe belonging, they often describe it as being synonymous with inclusion. But in my estimation, inclusion is more of an act that leads to a sense of belonging. So belonging to me is more of a feeling. It's, feeling like you're a part of something, like you belong. Inclusion is, the act of, making you belong, if you will.
Got it.
What about change management? Can we get a definition of that? We've kind of talked about diversity and DEI and kind of all of the terminologies around that. What about change management? I'm not super familiar with change management. So can you kind of go over that with me a little bit?
Well,
Yeah,
I'll say really quickly too, Leah and I, neither of us are experts in that space. So we're learning as much as the audience is learning right now too. So we're excited to get this definition from Cynthia.
Well, you might not realize it, but I'm sure you both and everybody, tuned in probably does more change management or is part of it than they think. Change management, then as a definition, it's a really broad term that defines how an organization goes about implementing modifications or alterations to their internal and or external processes. So it's simply just that, managing change.
Got it. So how would you relate that then to DEI? So like as it pertains to DEI, what is change management?
So essentially, DEI, embedding DEI principles into an organization requires change management efforts. So, when an organization decides to commit to meaningful change, its overall strategy on how to improve the employee experience from a DEI perspective takes a commitment to change through leadership alignment and adoption of principles related to DEI. So at the core, it's really about starting a robust communication strategy and a change roadmap that integrates DEI into the culture. And, it's important to be aware that the culture is essential because, as Peter Drucker says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So it's not just about the strategy, it's about, the culture of the organization, the people in it, and what needs to change that way.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, specifically the culture piece?
Yeah, I mean, culture is like, what's it like? What are we doing? Who are we? And to change that, every organization has a culture. And when you think about in terms of acquisitions, mergers, things like that, you come with, a culture here, you've got the overall culture, you've got all these different, sort of segments of culture within the larger culture, and then you're meshing them all together, right? So, there needs to be some sort of a process, or there should be, there doesn't need to be, change management is going to be, so change is going to happen, right? So it's how we manage that. I keep saying change and management, but it's really that simple. It's how we do that. So building our communication strategy, helping to seek to understand, what's happening, what's at play, what's going well, what's not going well, and developing a strategy, a communication plan, an education component, to build in meaningful change and not just solutions. We're trying to affect change, and we can just make solutions all day long and tell somebody to do something, and that's different, but that's not creating true meaningful change.
Yeah. So what about, let's switch gears slightly. So we know that it's important to have buy-in from stakeholders in order to create change, right? So how do you go about, so we want to get to the change. How do we convince everybody that that's what we want to do? How do you go about creating that with stakeholders?
Yeah. So when I think about DEI, DEIB, I think about curiosity, empathy, and communication. Okay, so those three things are really what sort of drive DEIB. And it really starts with that in the curiosity space, seeking first to understand what's going on, what's the current state, what do people think, how are people feeling, what are the processes, what's happening. Curiosity leads to asking good questions, active listening, and it provides an inroad to empathy. And, of course, that communication piece is the key factor. And you can't truly expect to have clear, authentic communication if these things are lacking. So, I guess another way of sort of doing this change is, you're reeling in your stakeholders. Stakeholders are really wanting to be included. They want to be part of the solution. They want to be part of creating the solutions. And, it's really important that they are part of the conversation, because that's the way you get buy-in.
To take things a bit further on the stakeholder piece, like, how do you know who your stakeholders are? So when you're thinking about going through this change management process, like knowing who your target stakeholders are going to be and who you really need to appeal to, that's got to be an important factor to consider. But, when you're thinking about that, like, what are some of the things that you need to think about when you're determining who your stakeholder audience is?
Yeah, so some stakeholders are obvious. Whoever the team is that's leading the change, who is the change going to affect? You have to look internal and externally. Sometimes stakeholders get missed, so it is important to get those sort of diverse perspectives. Sometimes you wouldn't maybe even think that, okay, IT is a stakeholder, because when you're building out sort of adding DEI components to an onboarding program, for example, you've got to think about whoever touches newly onboarded employee, hiring team, talent acquisition, the hiring manager and their team, the real estate team. Every organization calls that something different. Your IT team. Externally, are there any partners that need to be, maybe some of the clients that this person who's being onboarded will come in contact with, whoever and whatever it touches, that's who you need to consider being a stakeholder.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for that. With any sort of change, there's always like a bit of scariness that comes with it, right? Because change, good or bad, it can be uncomfortable for people because it's different and it's new. So I'm sure that means that there are some challenges associated with diversity and inclusion change management. Can you give us an idea of maybe what some of those look like, or from your experience, what you've kind of run into maybe in the past?
Yeah, sure. I guess the first huge challenge, and it's probably obvious, it's obvious to me, is getting buy-in from leaders and stakeholders. DEI in particular is an area that makes people uncomfortable. It's a fact. Many people think it should be natural, it should be organic, things change should just happen, and it shouldn't require any intentional focus, because frankly, something will happen. We have to guide what happens, and that's what change management is all about. The problem is that there's so many, people don't really understand that there's so many systemic issues at play that make that organic nature very difficult to attain without committed efforts. And, I almost hesitated to say the word systemic, because, that's a hard word for people to hear. Not many people, well, not many. There are many people that really don't believe that that systemic issues are real. But that's a whole other webinar, so we won't go into that.
Put that on the books for next year.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, all right, I'm already making people uncomfortable. Go overboard here. Another challenge, which really ties to the first, is the educational factor. You can't just expect people and processes to change unless the people involved in the change are champions of the change, and that requires them to be educated so that they can be committed to what their personal responsibility is, because it really does take individual responsibility to incite change. And a third thing that I can think of, it has to do with assumptions. So we all make assumptions, we all have biases, and those things make change, particularly in the DEI space, very challenging. There's assumptions that, we assume that we know about other people's struggles. We assume that it's easy to just, make a decision and change our behavior. It's not that simple.
a bit more complicated than all of that.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice if it was that simple?
It would be. Would be so nice. Yeah.
Well, it seems like, so speaking of challenges, I think we all know, obviously, Cynthia, I'm sure you know plenty of people in this DEI or DEIB space, being in the space yourself, and Ryan and I being sort of peripheral members in that space. I think we all have talked to people and know people who have sort of experienced burnout. It seems that it happens pretty frequently in the space. So what are some factors that you've seen that would contribute to that, and how can it be avoided or mitigated in some way?
Burnout. As with anything difficult or challenging, there's the propensity to burn out. I think in the DEI space, burnout happens, particularly, okay, everybody has decided that they need a DEI leader. We know that that's a fact, as, in the talent acquisition space, companies are like, please find us someone to fix our problems. And that's the issue. They're like, you get into the organization, the leader is ready to lead, and everybody goes, here you go. And they just kind of dump all the problems on this individual, and really sets them up for failure, because it's really hard to come into years and decades of problems, not really understanding them, having to, sort of play catch up. And then how do you change this organization without lots of education, lots of buy-in, it's such a huge, huge problem. And no one person can handle it. So very quickly they will burn out. I think that's the biggest thing, I think it's important that everybody really understand that they all have some sort of personal responsibility. And that varies, not everyone is blazing a trail, like leading the charge. But even those folks in the back of the crowd, who have a very little role to play, have a role to play. And, it's all incumbent upon us to determine what our role is, and, take some of the pressure off of one person who might be, held responsible for solving all the DEI problems in an organization. So I would say that's probably at the ground level of most of the burnout. A lot of things come from that, but at the core, it's just too much on one person. And generally it is a small team, not even a team. They hire one person and expect them to do all that work, and it's impossible.
Mm-hmm. Cynthia, you had mentioned that most organizations are kind of deciding right now that they need a DEIB leader at this point. Do you think every organization needs that, or are there like other solutions that they can consider aside from maybe bringing in a dedicated internal resource?
Does every organization need that? That's a really great question. Yes. And maybe, so a dedicated, I would say yes. I think there needs to be some committed focus, even if someone doesn't call themselves, a DEI leader, a dedicated DEI resource. I think your people teams should be looked at as champions in this space. And even if they don't have the letters behind their titles, they're at the core, the folks that should be really leading the charge. But I think that there's other there's organizations like Holistic, who really help organizations that don't have the resources to commit to an individual or a team, but help them to build out their strategy, and from a data perspective as well, like really understanding what your numbers are. Who do you have working for you? What do they think? Looking at that empirical data, like what's the factual data that we have, the voice of the employees, And then that sort of company DNA piece, like what makes us who we are, like how are we different from our competitors? What really sort of makes us who we are. So, there are a ton now, a ton of organizations in this space that are sort of, taking the lead and helping organizations to figure this out. But I think in most organizations, there probably should be a person or a team committed to that, and they can even partner with companies like Holistic, because they really can't, even with all the expertise in the world, it's really next to impossible to really create meaningful change in the DEI space by yourself.
Sure. So we've done a lot of talking about the challenges and burnout associated with this space, and we certainly don't want this to be all we leave our audience with. So Cynthia, do you have any examples you can share with us today? Maybe some companies that are doing it right, or some success stories that you've been a part of? We'd love to hear about that too.
Yes, I do. So there are lots of organizations that are really doing great stuff in this space. And, they're really transparent about what's going on. They're really just kind of opening up their books and saying, hey, this is where we are. This is what we're doing. We're seeking first to understand. We're listening. We're having the conversations. And so that's really great. But I would like to brag on some of Holistic's clients at this point.
Good.
As a director of client services, I have insight of all of our clients. I have some sort of, hand in whatever happens. But I really lead the team of client managers and support them in how they're supporting their clients. But there are 3 organizations in particular that I want to call out because I have a specific, I work with them specifically for whatever reason. And those are HelloFresh, RightPoint, and Yellow. And, I've been blown away by the intentionality and commitment that each of these orgs have brought to building out their DEI strategies, focusing on improving the overall experiences for their employees, particularly in this crazy year. But aside from 2020 being what it is, these orgs, HelloFresh, RightPoint, and Yellow, I'll say them again, they were already on the journey, right? They were already asking the questions and, asking employees what they needed from a DEI perspective, what the org could do to increase representation at every level, listening to their employees' experiences, even when those things were difficult to hear. When shared experiences called out inequitable practices with their firms, they did something about it. They didn't stop having the conversation. They continued to have the conversation and continue it today. And so I've been just blown away. And there are many organizations out there that are doing similar things. And I applaud them. It's really great.
That's awesome. So if there's organizations out there that are wanting to get started on this journey, so to speak, what would you suggest as the first step for them?
Wow. Well, I think, just knowing that you need to, provide some focus to DEI is a start, right? And so, just kind of talking to some leaders internally, understanding what their thoughts are. What do they know? What don't they know? Just because you're a CEO doesn't mean you know about everything, related to DEI and diverse perspectives. So, really, start the conversation. And, I think the easiest thing would be maybe talking to the leaders of the people team. They might have more connections in the space and, know who to reach out to provide support. There's always Holistic. And I mean, that's what we do. That's what we do. So, you could reach out to, organizations like us that, will help you and we'll ask the questions and we'll, and again, Holistic has a different approach because we have these proprietary tools that help you to measure your engagement, measure your representation, measure, things. You might think you know your numbers. Oh yeah, we have this many Black people, this many Asians, this many Latinx folks. But do you really know who's in your pipeline? Who's applying for your jobs? How are they making it through the process? How well do they do? With your, people who are applying, who's being hired? Are those folks staying? What's their experience like when they're on board? Why are they leaving? When they leave, where do they go? These are the things that you need to consider, and Holistic can help you to understand those things and to help build out strategies to improve those numbers.
Leah and I can both kind of relate to sharing the holistic experience because we here at HireWell have been going through the holistic experience as well, which I think has been really helpful for us. And we've been able to implement a lot of great change, especially over the past year, but even a bit longer than that. So we can speak to that and how great it is to partner with Holistic from that sense.
For sure.
Thank you for saying that. It's
hard. And you have a lot to do with that, Cynthia. I'll throw that out there too.
Well, thanks. I just show up and, I just really, like you said in my bio, I really want people to really understand themselves more fully and, be able to access their greatness. Like, I mean that. And, if we can be the best version of ourselves, we, have a small part in contributing to the overall success of our planet, of our world, and how we relate to people, because people matter.
Absolutely, they do. So I want to quickly just go to our comments to check and see if anyone has asked any questions during this. So we'll leave a few moments now for some Q&A from our audience. So give me just a moment to read through. Someone had made more of a statement here, and it said that you need good leaders to implement change. And I think that's a great thought there as well. And then someone else had asked, could you please describe the leadership of your company, Cynthia?
Ooh. So yeah, the first question, you need good leaders, absolutely right. Leadership development is, I think I mentioned this in the beginning, when you look at employee experience, leadership development is a very key pillar in the overall employee experience. And, having folks that understand the difficulties of the journey and helping them to lead well, to understand people, to understand their teams, to seek first to understand, that's really, really key. It's really important. The leadership at my company at Holistic is, Holistic is a fun place to work. We really, we all have the same philosophy, and that was one thing that drew me to Holistic, and I didn't even really know it at the time, how aligned we were in our philosophies. But Matt and Tom are really great leaders. They are very different. They're on two ends of the spectrum, and I think I'm somewhere in the middle. So we make a really great unit together. We've got the dedicated focus, the analytic minds. We have the creativity. We've got the assertiveness, and we've got the same kind of crazy almost. Like we don't take ourselves too seriously. No one does, and I think that really helps in getting stuff done.
Awesome. Thanks for that insight, Cynthia. So it doesn't look like right now we have any additional questions, but for folks that do have questions that are going to be watching this webinar back, feel free to connect with myself, with Leah, especially with Cynthia, since she is our expert in this space, if you have any questions. Any other thoughts or comments before we wrap things up today?
I had a quick question for Cynthia. Do you have any, so what about companies like maybe smaller companies or folks that have been kind of hamstrung a little bit by maybe the COVID economy that we're in, that don't have the resources they want to kind of, move into some sort of DEI initiative or something, but they don't really have the resources to bring on a dedicated person for that. Do you have any advice for folks like that?
Yeah, Holistic, I keep talking about Holistic, but that's what I do. Holistic has some resources that we blog about, that we give out. We've got a inclusive language toolkit, for example, that we, share free of charge, things like that. Things on allyship and microaggressions, biases, all of these things. There are resources out there that can help folks. There's a lot on the internet. You can Google things, and there's a lot of stuff out there that, I don't know, I kind of roll my eyes at too. But if you partner with some good people, there's some great folks on LinkedIn that you can get connected with, that have large networks of really great people who are well informed and really looking to just make a better world. And it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
All right, well, I think that's going to conclude today's webinar. Cynthia, thank you so much for your time and for joining us. We really appreciate your insights, and it's been a pleasure having you. And Leah, thanks for joining me on your first live too. I, as always, appreciate you as well. So I had mentioned, if anybody has any questions, you want to connect with any of us, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn. And then, of course, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Holistic, you can connect directly with Cynthia or check out their website, www.holisticindex.com. And we will see everybody soon. So have a great, great rest of the year, everyone. And thanks for tuning in.
Thanks all. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.